Welcome! Want to be able to tackle any sewing project with confidence? Today I'll be breaking down the 5 essential stitches that every beginner needs to know. Plus, I'll show you what each one is for. Master these and you'll be ready for almost any sewing project that comes your way. Now the first stitch we're going to dive into is the straight stitch. Now to do a straight stitch, if you have an electronic machine, all you have to do is turn it on and it should default to the straight stitch settings. If you have a mechanical machine, just go ahead and turn the dial to the setting that looks like a straight stitch. For a straight stitch, the automatic settings should be sufficient in most cases. Now, if you want to increase the length of each stitch, then you would just press this button. If you want to decrease it, press that button. Now the stitch width isn't really like a width between the stitch like a zigzag stitch would be, but rather the position of the needle. So in this case, it means this is the position of the needle to the left or the right. If I wanted the needle to move further to the left, I would push this button. If I wanted it to go further to the right, I would press this button. Now 9 times out of 10, I'm going to leave it exactly where it is and just adjust the seam allowance instead of moving the needle itself. To sew a straight stitch, go ahead and line up the edge of your fabric to the seam allowance. On my machine, I have this nice 1/2-inch seam allowance mark, in addition to other marks I could choose. But for now, let's just line up to the most obvious and visible mark. I'm going to leave the stitch settings where they are, and while gently holding the fabric to make sure that it doesn't move without pushing it or pulling it, I'm going to press the pedal down and just sew a standard straight stitch. The next stitch is a back stitch. A back stitch is essentially stitching backwards. It's when the direction of the needle sewing is reversed. This is typically done to reinforce seams or the edge of a section of fabric that has just been run through the machine to secure the threads and prevent them from coming undone. Most machines have some sort of reverse or tacking button that you push in order to reverse the direction of the sewing. So to sew a back stitch, you're first going to sew a straight stitch. I'm going to hit this reverse button right here, which used to be like a U shape, kind of like a U-turn, but it's gotten worn from overuse. And so I'm going to hit that button while we sew, and it's going to sew backwards. Now, do it at the end. Now the next one is a zigzag stitch. The zigzag stitch can be used to finish raw edges, enclose seams, add decoration, or for stretchy fabrics or flexible seams. In order to adjust your stitch settings to sew a zigzag stitch, you'll just find the stitch that looks like a zigzag and read the code beneath it. On my machine, 03 is the setting for a zigzag stitch. So I just move this button until the screen shows 03. Now it's automatically selected a width and a stitch length. I can increase or decrease the position between the zigzag as much as I want. I can also increase or decrease the space between the zigzag. Most of the time, however, the automatic settings are sufficient. So a zigzag stitch, I'm just going to move in my fabric in a little bit more so that there's room to sew the zigzag stitch next to the existing stitch. I've already set my machine to the zigzag stitch and left it on the automatic settings. Now, if I want to adjust the width of the zigzag to make it wider, I can do that. And I'm going to make the length a little longer. See the difference? In order to pre-treat the edge of your fabric, just line up your fabric and the outer edge of the zigzag stitch where the needle either hits the very edge of the fabric or just over the fabric so that it catches the end and encloses that edge. When finishing seams, place your fabric together, sew them together with the seam allowance as normal, and then run it back through the machine using the zigzag stitch on the edge in the same way. The next stitch is a basting stitch. A basting stitch is a really long straight stitch that is used for temporarily holding things together. It's meant to be removed. It is typically made of maximizing the stitch length to make it easy to remove once the final stitching is completed. This can be done either by machine or by hand. If done by machine, the stitch length should be set to the maximum length that the machine will allow. If done by hand, make sure there is sufficient space, maybe at least a centimeter, between each stitch to make them easy to remove once the final stitching is complete. Now, in order to set the stitch for a basting stitch, I would just increase the stitch length to the maximum that my machine will allow, which for my machine is 4.8, and that gives us a longer stitch. The stitch width is not necessary to adjust in this case, unless you're trying to move the position of the needle left or right. Now, if you're getting value out of today's video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more sewing tips and beginner tutorials. It really does help. The final stitch is an overedge stitch. The overedge stitch can finish raw edges, enclose seams, and strengthen seams. Now, one reason I really like this stitch is that it can enclose raw edges and finish seams in one step. This adds ease and convenience to a project and also saves a lot of time. To use the overcasting presser foot and the overedge stitch, you just want to find the symbol for the overedge stitch on your machine. It looks like this. For mine, I have two options available, either 10 or 11, but I typically like to use 10 because that puts the straight edge further within the line of the fabric and only the edge of the triangle is looping over the edge. So to select this stitch, I only need to hit this button one time. Now, it is automatically set with a stitch width and a stitch length appropriate for the stitch. I don't typically tend to mess with the stitch length at all. I haven't found a reason to, but you can by either pressing this button to increase the length or this button to decrease the length. One reason to adjust these is to either increase or decrease the distance from the line of thread to the edge of the fabric. If you want less distance between the stitch and the edge of the fabric, then you would simply select this button to narrow the width, which will move the needle further to the right. If you want to increase the distance between the thread and the edge of the fabric, then you'll hit this button to increase the width, which moves the needle further to the left. To do the overedge stitch, we're going to need to change presser feet to the overedge foot. Since my machine has snap-on presser feet, I'm just going to snap that into place, put the fabric through the presser foot, and adjust my stitch settings to the overedge stitch. Now, to do the overedge stitch, you're going to want to line up the fabric right to the edge of this piece here. Not sure how well you can see it, but on this presser foot there is a little lip right here, and that's what you're going to be lining up the fabric to, as opposed to seam allowance. So to enclose this raw edge, I'm going to line the fabric right up to the edge of that lip and sew it with the automatic settings. Voila! The raw edge has been enclosed. You can also increase the stitch width and the length for a different effect. Alright, so I've set mine to the max that it will go, and let's look at the difference. See the difference? Now, if you got value out of today's video, then you may want to check out this one next. And check out this playlist for more beginner tutorials. Thanks for watching!